Welcome to the Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting for Wednesday, January 13th. The board is now going to recess and go into executive session. I will lead us into executive session, and when the executive session is over, the board will return to this platform for the rest of the meeting. So the Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. The board reserves the right to come back out into public session should the need arise. And as I stated earlier, the need will arise. We will return to the board meeting live in approximately 60 minutes. Thank you.
We are now reconvening our regular January 12th, 13th Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting. We are now on item number 2 in our Wednesday agenda, County Administration. A, report quarterly update on Equity 2.0 and Resolution 20-06-09-06. I don't know if Mr. Mokrahysky wants to make any introductory remarks, but we have with us Mo Young, our Equity and Access Coordinator, and Judy Williams, our Strategy and Integration Manager.
Well, thank you, Chair. I don't want to take too much time to do introductory comments because Mo and Judy have a great presentation here, and we do want to allow for some discussion among the board. Just to say that, you know, we've invested a lot of time and effort and resources over the last several years in our equity work. And I think, as we all have noted, this is really an evolution. This is not work that really ends, but if done right, it evolves over time with thought and collaboration and progress. And so that's what you're going to hear and see today, I think, is a little bit on where we've been and where we've come to, and more importantly, where we're headed, really with an eye towards continuing to evolve and progress our equity, access, and inclusion work. And we have a great team of staff and officials throughout our organization that have committed to really work intensively on this work. Many of those folks are on the call here today. You're going to hear about our equity lens is the next item after this one. But right now, I want to just turn it over to Mo Young, our Equity and Access Coordinator, and Judy Williams, our Strategy and Integration Manager, to walk through an update on our Equity 2.0 work.
Wonderful. Good morning, Chair Bernie and Commissioners. This is Judy Williams, our Strategy and Integration Manager, and we have Mo Young as well. I'm going to start off with a couple of slides and then turn it over to Mo. We have about a 15-minute brief presentation, and then we have about 15 minutes to turn it back over to you, Chair, for any questions or follow-up. So I'm hoping, it looks like everyone can see my screen.
We can.
Perfect. Okay, so here's just a very brief overview of the things that we're going to be talking about today. We've talked a lot about Equity 2.0, and so we just thought it might be a good reminder to just kind of delineate, you know, what was Equity 1.0, where are we at with Equity 2.0, talk a little bit about our Equity Action Plan, you know, what we've been working on the last few months as it relates to the racial equity resolution passed by the board, follow up on our listening sessions and next steps, as well as follow up on the Ferry Street Bridge project. And with that, I'm going to go right into Equity 1.0. And I won't read everything, but essentially, you know, we've had a lot of equity work in the past, in the history with our organization, and kind of took a relaunch to that effort in 2015 with, you know, really looking at how do we want to develop and create that infrastructure for our equity efforts. And with that, we had an advisory body, a task force made up of key folks in the community to really help us guide what did we need and make that happen. And so with that, we had the recruitment of both the recruitment coordinator in HR, as well as Mo Young, our Equity and Access Coordinator. So that happened in 2016. Also, we created and developed the Equity and Access Advisory Board and worked to really start the processes to improve recruitment, retention, selection, and advancement in those areas, and particularly with that infrastructure created behind the scenes. So Equity 2.0 really, you know, started around 2019 as we're seeing the need and hearing from folks in the community and just wanting to kind of relaunch our equity efforts. We had the infrastructure, but what plans, you know, what were we working on? What were some of the priorities? We had a lot on our plate, but really trying to make the most of the resources that we had. And so two key things really happened to create Equity 2.0, which is really a deepening of our training. So there was 8 county employees that attended a fairly intense 9-month process with GARE, which is our Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And with that, we had, members, 8 of us across departments represented and really focusing on racial equity and how government can have and play a role in that effort. Also at this time, knowing that we were wanting to relaunch and revisit some of our priorities, we had a facilitated process with Terrell from Banyan Consulting that really helped us to talk through, walk through the strengths, weaknesses, what can we focus on? What do we see ahead in the horizon? We had really great conversations with the board. We also involved E2, which is our internal equity and education committee. We involved our leadership teams, and we also involved our Equity and Access Advisory Board in that facilitated discussion to really identify what those priorities were. So kind of with all of those efforts, we were able to create the framework of what we're calling Equity 2.0 and this racial equity action plan that we are working on to date. And as Steve mentioned earlier, we will be hearing a little bit more about the one of those items, that the equity lens conversation, soon after this presentation. Oh, and just that was a picture down below. I just wanted to highlight quickly. We had, during this process, we were also lucky to have, we typically have an annual leadership summit with all of our supervisors and managers throughout the county. And so we were able to bring this topic as we were, really kind of starting the work of our Equity 2.0, bring it to all of our supervisors and managers. So over around 250 employees to really set the tone about, how does government play a role in our racial equity work, try and get on the same page with definitions, normalizing that work and really having that at the leadership level in our organization. A couple more slides. This framework, likely, I think we've brought this to you in a prior quarterly updates, but just to normalize the conversation for us and bring it back to the group discussion, this is kind of a one pager. So we have a more in-depth equity action plan. This is really just a quick kind of overview of what is it that we're working on now with Equity 2.0. And I won't go through everything in detail, but just highlights are, one, our priority of normalizing that racial equity work through training and education. So really getting on the same page, what are our shared definitions of equity? What are our shared expectations about training? Reviewing the competencies and training requirements, and as well as some of the organizational processes. So, are we communicating, and how are we communicating with our organization? How are we communicating with E2, as well as our advisory body, the Equity and Access Advisory Board? So along with the normalizing stage, number 2, our priority is organizing racial equity through strengthening of the equity program. And this is really some of that infrastructure piece in terms of providing support and opportunities for our equity and access coordinator and analyst to be involved in decision-making and conversations, as well as really highlighting that racial equity core team that we created. So most of the core team involves several of the folks that were part of the GARE 9-month intensive training that we wanted to stick together and continue to have the conversations and move us forward, as well as do the bigger picture strategic thinking on moving us forward. But some of the other pieces are really around data and collection of data. As we, this has been mentioned several times, equity work and data analytics really go hand in hand. And so, through the listening sessions that we're doing, we're collecting data, we're reviewing, what access to data do we already have? What do we need in order to understand, where things are at, with the listening sessions, hear from the public, hear from our employees about what's working, what's not working, and to start the conversation about how do we address some of those and work through any barriers. The third priority is really operationalizing. So it's primarily through the work of an equity lens, which you'll hear about in a few minutes. But so creating that equity lens decision-making tool and then implementation of it, as well as going through kind of, once we have some of the data, once we use our equity tool, once we're engaging the community, how do we review those policies and practices so that we can create some change, try things out, implement anti-racist policies and practices. So this is a brief overview of that one pager. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Mo to finalize some of the other slides and open it up for questions after that. So Mo, do you want to take over?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Judy. Good morning, commissioners. This slide is just an overview of the last 3 months. I want to call out a couple of things, and then we'll dig a little deeper into others as we move forward. So we talk a little bit under the normalized bullet about creating shared competencies and trainings that fit. I wanted to share also that the group that is that's working on that is working on identifying gaps in trainings and how to fill those gaps. And also there's a meeting in 2 weeks. It was going to be this week, it got rescheduled, with the Equity Lens Ad Hoc Committee to really talk about what are some foundational trainings that are needed so that the folks who are using the Equity Lens really understand the why behind why we have it. We'll talk about listening sessions and the root cause analysis in the next couple slides, and so I won't dig into that right now. I wanted to share that the Equity and Access Board Advisory Board had a retreat on Saturday. They've identified their focus for the year, and we have up to 8 vacancies. We have 13 applications for those vacant positions, and 3 of them are actually in rural areas. And so I'm super excited that we may have 4 of the 5 rural spots filled. That's something that we've struggled to do in the past. So then the next slide is about the listening session. Yeah. So you'll see here that we have these overarching themes from the 7 racial equity listening sessions that we held in the fall. In addition to those sessions, we'll have the Spanish session on the 27th at 6 p.m. And we also plan on having at least 2 and potentially 3 internal employee listening sessions. So 1 for supervisors and managers, and 1 for 1 or 2 for staff, probably 2 for other staff, 1 during the day and 1 kind of after hours. Once all of those have happened, we will wrap in any themes that come out that are new additions. And then the next slide talks about what we're going to do with the information from those sessions. So our plan is to do something that we learned in the GARE cohort, which is to do a root cause analysis. A root cause analysis really is looking at addressing the root of a problem. So looking at inequity and asking why it's happening instead of addressing just the symptoms for it. It's really like it's a public health concept. It's prevention at its core is what it is. And it's important because if we do a bad job or a poor job of identifying root causes of the inequities that we've identified, we will waste time and resources putting Band-Aids on symptoms of the problem, and the inequities will still be here. And so the Racial Equity Core team is working on a process to do this root cause analysis with community and also with employees based on the information that we get out of the listening session. We should be in the next couple of months where you'll get an update about what happens for those at your next update. And then the next slide is the Ferry Street Bridge update. So as a reminder, on July 21st, I'm going to read it because I want to make sure I get it right. The board directed staff to return with a resolution of acknowledgement regarding the property ownership of the Ferry Street Bridge. they requested a thorough examination of the Black experience in Eugene and an educational walking tour. So thus far, we've created a timeline and a map. Those are on the website, just links. We're still working on getting them embedded in the website, which is why I haven't sent a big excited email to you all, but they're there if you want to check them out. And one thing that I'm super excited about is there's actually a form linked to that where community members can suggest additions. And so if somebody wants to add something, if there's pictures, a newspaper clipping, whatever, they can fill that out and I'll get the email. And then we'll work with the core team or some other team to decide whether, you know, it should be added. So it's really, it has an opportunity at least to be an interactive tool with the community. Our next steps are to, like I said, embed the timeline and map into the page, and then to write that resolution and bring it to the board. And then the next handful of slides are just examples of what you'll see when you go to the timeline and the map. So you can pick dates. You can see up at the top, you know, those dots. If you click on each one, it'll bring up whatever the issue, whatever the event is. When we have pictures available, we put those on. So this is the timeline, and then what's the next slide? And this is what the map is. So you'll see there's like a key at the top, and then you click on each one. I know that in the assignment it said a educational walking tour, but Lane County is really big. So we decided that a map that people could interact with and then, you know, drive to different places or bike to different places would probably be better in the long run for us. There's just another example of the map. What's the next slide? And the next. Okay, so the next steps are, like we talked about, the Spanish language community listening session. That's on the 27th, so 2 weeks from today. The employee listening sessions, our core team will be scheduling those. We meet on Thursday, so we'll likely be scheduling them, you know, start tomorrow. We'll set the dates. Root cause analysis with community and with employees, the Ferry Street Bridge resolution to you all, and then piloting the equity lens. I know me and Judy didn't spend a lot of time on the equity lens because you'll be hearing from the group that's really been working on that next. And so have no fear. Now, questions, it's your turn.
Our fearless leader, Mo Young, has told us it's our turn. Are there any commissioners that would like to either ask questions or make statements at this time? Commissioner Buck.
I'll start out just to express my full support with all the work that you are doing, and thank you for what you have done so far. I look forward to either being part of the conversation or supporting you in any way that I can in order to move this really important work along. So thank you.
Commissioner Krieger.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I just want to say what a thrill it is as a former member of our Equity and Access Advisory Board to now be in this seat to support moving that work forward from a policy perspective, how much I appreciate the presentation and how important I think it is. It's always been important, but as many organizations, many folks on this board have been discussing what we're learning in terms of the disparate impacts of COVID on individuals in our community, on groups of folks, on demographics, on different industries and businesses. We can see so many disparate impacts and outcomes, and I think it's just so timely and important that we're already well on our way with this work as we look to the years ahead, and specifically in terms of COVID recovery and response. I also just want to mention, sort of flag that at some point in the future, I'd like us to have more of a conversation on the cover memo for this item, E, health implications. and also in Ms. Young's comments in her presentation, this is fundamental public health principles at work when we talk about equity. And so I think it's really important that we find a time and a way to talk very specifically about addressing racism through a public health framework, and perhaps even formally committing to and naming racism as a public health crisis, because that will help us frame the conversations and bring some resources to bear from this organization on how we're going to address equity work, specifically racial equity in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Other Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. Mo, I don't see your face on the screen, but you know, I've had an opportunity to sit on quite a number of the Equity and Access Board meetings, both in the current Zoom format and prior to that in the round. And just want to express my both my appreciation and my admiration for the way you as staff handle the meeting, but also for the way the chairs of the committee have been very inclusive in the discussion. I don't participate, that is to say, I am a non-voting member and typically a non-debating member. I'm not a panelist for the meetings, but the board does invite me to speak from time to time and does invite my opinion from time to time. That being said, I really enjoy being at those meetings, and thank you, Mo, and thank you to the chairs as we progress through the different chairs for being able to be a part of those meetings. The board has progressed significantly. The advisory board has progressed significantly since the initial days, which started, as you recall, Mo, up in 256 with you and a whiteboard and a relatively small steering committee that helped you make your recommendations to Steve Mucker-Heisky that formed this committee. So good work, Mo, and continue the progress. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I don't see your hand. Commissioner Vozovich, would you like to say anything at this time?
I just want to say, we're continuing the good work that started way back in 2015, and continuing some of the work we did when then Chair Stewart put forth and the board adopted a resolution after the November 2016 election about the inclusivity and welcomeness of Lane County. And just hope that we continue to expand that. And it just seems like we're headed in good directions. I don't have a whole lot more to say beyond that. It's progression of work over now it's, we're going into our 6th year of working on equity. And it's been a progression from that start back in 2015 to our statement we made after the 2016 election to our continued commitment to being inclusive and fair and trying to work on these issues, and particularly to work at the root causes. I love that phrase, and Mo and I have talked about this before. It's like, get to the root cause of stuff and try and find out where that is. Quite often it takes a little bit deeper look than just some of the symptoms, and that's really an important place to go. So I really support looking for those root causes.
I want to thank both Judy and Mo. You have been steadfast and persistent. Full disclosure, if Mo Young had not given me a couple of books to read when I started, I don't think I would be nearly as able to navigate through this process as I am. So thank you for that, Mo. It's the first time I've actually formally acknowledged it. And I'm going to burden you. You know how I keep wanting to introduce you to people, and hopefully, well, there's a good friend of mine who has confronted exactly the same kinds of issues institutionally, moving equity, but in a very sort of very tangible way through a different kind of system. And his name is Shamari Davis. And Shamari is the head of the IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Minority Association, for all of Southern California. He happens to have family here. And he's indicated to me that if he could ever be useful on his nickel, he would come here to be a consultant, another ear, but he's a great guy. And I encourage you. I just, I think that I only wish that all of the United States had a commitment to trying to deal with root causes and ending the structure as well as the attitude of racism that is rearing its head these days tremendously. And I can't thank you and Judy and our entire team enough for all of your work. Are there any commissioners that want to have another round at this point? Judy, Mo, Steve, is there anything else for us as it relates to this part of the presentation?
Not from me.
No, thank you all for your time, and we'll keep doing these quarterly updates, so we'll keep you informed in what we're working on. Thank you all for your time and your input.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll hang around for the next item too.
You got it. The next item is item 2B on our Wednesday, January 13th regular meeting agenda. It is a work session, an update on the progress and goals of the creation of an equity lens for Lane County. Greg Rickoff, Director of Operations, Kachina Inman, Health and Human Services, Assistant Director, from the Equity Lens Ad Hoc Committee, Mr. Mokrahysky. I don't know if you'd like to introduce this topic or not.
I think we'll give it right to Greg. Go ahead, Greg.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Burney, commissioners, I'm Greg Rickoff. I'm the Director of Operations, the Chief Operations Officer here at the county. I'm very pleased to be part of this conversation today. It's been my honor to serve as the director on this interdepartmental, really interdisciplinary committee tasked with the development of the equity lens. Given the fact that I get more time than most with you all, I've asked to take a back seat this morning to give you an opportunity to really hear from my colleagues and my committee mates. This is an exciting and remarkable team, and I'm honored to be a part of it. If we do this work well, and I have every reason to believe we will, I think you will find this transformative for the county. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kachina Inman.
Good morning, commissioners. Thank you for your time. I'm going to kick us off here with a few goals, and then I really want to take some time to have a chance for all of us to introduce ourselves, as we've been an amazing committee of people and all a deep part of it. Our goals for today are really to provide you with the goals of the Equity Lens Committee. We also want to provide you with the work that we have done to date. And most importantly, we look forward to receiving some feedback from you as we move forward on this work. So next slide. So who are we? You've just heard introduction from Greg, and we'll quickly go through this and we'll each introduce ourselves.
Gustavo, you want to jump in?
Yes, I apologize. I apparently don't know how to use technology. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Gustavo Presidente. I work at Lane County Youth Services as the probation supervisor, otherwise known as a supervision supervisor.
Great. Kachina Inman with Health and Human Services, the assistant director. And Krista Noble is unable to meet with us, but she's with Assessment and Taxation. Luke, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Luke Arnold. I'm a needs assessor in developmental disabilities. My role on this committee is actually as a representative of the Health and Human Services Trauma-Informed Care Committee to make sure that a trauma-informed care perspective is utilized throughout the lens.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Mackenzie Neal, and I'm a juvenile counselor at Lane County Youth Services, and I serve on our Equity Committee as well as the E2 Committee with the county.
And I'm Nevada Martinez Warren. I work with Health and Human Services Administration with Resource Development and Strategic Initiatives.
And my name is Tekla Evanuk, and I work in Human Resources, and I work for Lane County Public Works. Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Excellent. So we're going to briefly just outline our goals as an ad hoc committee. So for the development of the lens, create a shared equity lens definition, which we will share with you today. Create supporting documents. We need frameworks and tools so we can actually implement and move this work forward. And we always want the ability to modify and do better and be more effective as we get more comfortable using the lens. We always want to look forward to an equitable and inclusive process. So this means partnering with our unions and engaging across the county. Next slide. And then for implementation of the lens, these are heavy lifts. So training staff, support and advocating for consistent foundational equity training. You just heard a little bit about this from Mo and Judy. And it will be very important that we have that foundational piece so that we can use these tools in the most effective way. And then, of course, we need time to orient and train our staff so they really understand how to use the tool. Implement the equity lens, of course. So we want to remove unnecessary barriers. We want to make expectations clear, and we want to use this tool as frequently as possible. And then collecting data, evaluating our impact, and adapting the tool and our work as needed will be a very critical part, and creating that system of accountability. Next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Gustavo.
Thank you, Katrina. And I'm realizing, Commissioners, that it says my name is Mackenzie Neal. I can assure you, I'm not Mackenzie Neal. I work with her. She's great. Thank you for this opportunity.
We have two Mackenzie Neals on our screen, by the way.
That's right. That's right. And I should have also mentioned earlier that I was one of the people that was part of the GARE cohort, which was a very transformative process for myself personally and professionally. And having said that, I want to talk a little bit about what an equity lens is. And to be honest, I had a little bit of a difficult time trying to find a definition that would be suitable for today's discussion, given that there's so many layers to equity work in general. It's hard to conceptualize, let alone define, and I may even say carry out equity work across the county in a meaningful way. And so I think I speak for all of our team members when I say that it's greatly appreciated to see how much support is given on this level. There's so many parts, as I mentioned, to this work, and it's important that we have tools built into our county's infrastructure that help us better identify, unpack, digest, and respond to complex issues related to equity that are at our core beliefs as county members. The equity lens is a tool that helps us address some of those most pressing issues, or at least begin that process. One way of one definition that I came across that spoke to me was that racial equity, or an equity lens, seeks to identify and eliminate potential barriers for marginalized individuals and groups, and it's a process for analyzing and diagnosing the impact of the design and implementation of policies on underserved and marginalized groups and individuals. You can see on the screen that a racial equity lens is a set of questions that we ask ourselves when we plan, develop, or evaluate a policy, program, or decision. It helps us, the purpose of the lens is to deliberately include is to be deliberately inclusive as we make decisions. It is explicit in drawing attention to the inclusion of underserved and marginalized populations with an emphasis on communities of colors, and can be adapted to focus on other communities. An equity lens will not tell us what action to take. Rather, the lens will help us discuss and reflect on equity considerations as we act and make decisions. I hope that provides a little bit of an understanding. Luke Arnold has a good example that I'm going to turn it over to him so he can share that and hopefully provide a little bit more context. Thank you.
Chair Bernie, may I insert something very quickly? Just a thank you to Judy for sending these slides. We all have them available through our email this morning. Thank you, Judy.
Thanks, Gustavo. So running, and specifically trail running, is one of my hobbies. About 10 years ago, I changed my running form, which was one of the more difficult things I've done in my life because it involved retraining my muscles and reflexes on the mechanics of my running form. In other words, to change a habitual physical activity that I had done since I was very young. And when I had done it before, I had always done it without thinking about how I was doing it and whether how I was doing it was helping or hurting my body. I started with a training plan and multiple times at a track, on a sidewalk, at a field of working on changing my running form. It took about 2 years, and I had several setbacks, including nagging pain and minor injuries, probably about 6 times when I had to change the expectations of my training plan and go back to the basics of 1 stride, 10 strides, 50 yards, 100 yards of doing it properly. Even with all that practice, it didn't really come together for me until I asked a couple other runners I knew who were familiar with the mechanics of running form to look at what I was doing. They were able to give me specific feedback about what I should be doing. For example, don't land on your heel, land on midfoot and roll off, blade toes, look forward, not down, hips above feet, posture straight with a slight forward lean. I started with changing my running form because I read a book about it, but it wouldn't have worked for me to read a book about it and expect that I knew how to do it in reality. Conversely, it wouldn't have worked for me to go and run 5 miles on the trail, even with my running friends, without practicing the mechanics and form on the shorter distances first. My point, as it applies to the equity lens, it's not enough to read a book or instructions on how to do something. People need to practice with real life situations. It's not enough to practice on your own. People need other people familiar to the work to give them specific feedback and model the work. And if it doesn't go as well as you hope, people may need to reset and get back to basics and revise expectations.
Thank you, Luke, for that example to say and explain how all those pieces are part. And it is really retraining our brain to ask those deeper questions. And it takes the education and that foundation, the practice, the team, all those really important components. Mackenzie, you want to take it away on the next slide?
Yes, so kind of one of the most common questions that you get to with implementing is when you might use an equity lens. And that seems like kind of like the biggest question that we are faced with, and that's kind of the best part about the equity lens that we've been developing is that it really can be used for any decision, small or large. Some examples that we've come up with are like, where should we dedicate our COVID testing this month? Things I'm looking at, location, geography, and the populations that are there. Where should we allocate fiscal resources during scarce times? How can we ensure internal communications reach everyone in the organization quickly? With that being cascading messages, with that being any sort of kind of a message that we need to push out quickly, but also making sure that we're doing it equitably. Should we purchase a new building to expand services? These are all ways that we can use an equity lens to help us make the best informed decision that we can moving forward to include all parties. And as we practice, we retrain ourselves, like Luke was speaking with in his analogy, to ask new questions that may help us better understand potential impact of decision making. So gives us a good pause to kind of just take a second, look at what we're trying to do and figure out if we're doing that in the most equitable way and in the way that it's going to best serve the population that we're working with. That's the next slide, Judy. Thank you.
All right, so good morning again. So it's a pretty big project. I wanted to give you just a very quick sense of some of the work that we've done to date. As you know, and as Gustavo touched on, we've created a shared definition of an equity lens from the previous slide. We looked at, we reviewed, we modified multiple tools from other agencies and jurisdictions. And then we began identifying opportunities to trial the lens itself and talking about the complexity of implementing that lens, the need for training, for trialing, for tailoring that tool for different settings and needs that we have in the county. We took some time to learn about the successes and the barriers of lens development, and that included talking with and learning from public health about the implementation of health in all policies. As Luke noted, we took steps to include a trauma-informed perspective. And finally, we initiated the development of a toolkit to help us, use and trial this lens more effectively. We've got sort of a brief version, an expanded version, and we'd also like to, we looked at developing tools for specific situations. So that's just a very quick summary of what we've done to date. And I will hand it off now to Nevada, I believe.
Thank you, Tekla. I have the honor of walking you through the equity lens tools that we believe are ready to be piloted. And the first one is a very brief lens. We wanted a concise version that might work for some situations well. And so to really get an idea, as I walk you through this, I'm asking each of you to hold in your mind a specific decision point, something that is on your plate that you think, hey, it would be really useful to have an equity lens in order to move forward well in this area. And if nothing immediately pops into your mind, you might consider, should we buy a new building to expand services? Just as an example to think about and hold in your mind as we're going through these questions. And with that, we want to start by asking ourselves, and you can do this individually, but it's even better if you do so as a group. I think it's really important that the equity lens tools bring in the information we know, the knowledge we know, and so having really diverse perspectives as part of that can really help expand how useful these questions are and the depth that the answers can give us. So ask yourself or your group, what's the purpose? What are we trying to do? What is our goal? And then who will be impacted? And are they being included in the process? And then we want to look at outcomes. How might this decision increase, decrease, or ignore equity? And when doing this, we need to consider race and also consider gender identity, age, country of origin, geography, disability, class, socioeconomic status, language, the balance of power, and other considerations as well. And once we've determined what action we're going to take, then we need to ask ourselves a couple more questions. So how will we ensure communication takes place in an inclusive and culturally sensitive manner to those impacted? And how will we know if we've accomplished our goal? Next slide, please. And so that was the entire brief version, but we also have made available in a more expanded version where we have the same categories, but go into some additional questions. So thinking about that same decision point, ask yourself, what are we trying to do? What is the issue, policy, or process being examined? What assumptions are we bringing to the issue? And then we want to consider inclusion and representation. So who's included in this process? Who is not included in this process? and ask ourselves why. How are we intentionally engaging multiple perspectives? How have barriers to participate been addressed? And then we look at the impact or the outcomes. What are the outcomes we're hoping to create? What are the potential unintended outcomes? How will we address these? Who is being impacted by this decision? And we look at the levels of policy, issue, and process. And how might this decision increase, decrease, or ignore equity? And again, we want to consider race and additional categories as well. We have those spelled out. Okay. Next slide, please. Then we go to our process and communication and ask ourselves, how and when will this process be communicated? How will we ensure communication takes place in an inclusive, culturally sensitive, and responsible manner? And of course, including evaluation and feedback, we ask ourselves if we're accomplishing our initial goal. What barriers prevented more equitable outcomes? And how will we address these? How will we incorporate this learning next time? And to do that, we need to know how will feedback from staff and stakeholders be collected? Who will we share evaluations with? What did we learn? And how will you use evaluation and learning to raise racial awareness? Next slide. And so this is really something that we've talked through and decided that no one tool or even two brief and expanded versions of a tool are going to give us all the questions we need to ask for every situation. And these really are tools. I just keep thinking about a mechanic has so many tools, but it's really, a screwdriver is going to do something very different in the hands of my 11-year-olds and the hands of, a carpenter or a mechanic. It's the person that is utilizing the tool that's going to make the most difference. But we also think that having some situation-specific tools available to us can really get us to the right questions. These are can absolutely be modified. We can expand, but we fell in love with this set of tools that was developed by the City of Ottawa and the City for All Women initiative that included specific situation documents. They're almost like worksheets or sets of questions, and they're for the following areas. And each of them has an expanded set of questions for that area. So when, one of the areas is communications, and they get much more in depth into, is the medium easily accessible and understood? The full diversity of our target audience, and going into, is it plain language, accessible formats, graphics, multiple languages, etc., and a number of other questions. Or when we look at a toolkit specifically for engaging community and staff, there's a question of, is there a history between the county and the community, or between communities that we need to consider? And how will we ensure everyone is heard? And then there's additional tools for gathering information and research, leading and supervising, monitoring and evaluation, planning, services, projects, programs, events. So this might be a tool you would pull up when you were considering that question of, should we buy a building in order to expand our services, and go into more depth with the questions we're asking ourselves. Policy development is another area. Recruiting and hiring staff and volunteers, strategic planning, training staff and volunteers, and working with people. So our hope is to be able to provide these with a framework of these are all different tools that we have in our toolboxes, and give people some support around being able to select what would work best in different circumstances and practices using and expanding our abilities to be effective with these. Next slide.
Okay, so our next steps here, the training piece is a really critical component. So as you heard, we'll be meeting with a training subcommittee to make sure that we're aligned and giving staff that foundational training so they can use the equity tool, lens tool, in an efficient, effective, and meaningful way. We need to continue to enhance our communication with leadership, unions, and staff. And so we have a plan to kind of roll that out throughout this, the next couple of months. In February, we hope to complete the draft toolkit. We have most of those pieces. It's just solidifying it. And then in March, we're going to begin trialing the tool in different groups and committees. And we've already had a lot of great discussion with our elected and appointed directors. And they've already identified places such as the Climate Action Plan, Mackenzie River fire recovery, behavioral health work, our COVID response is some of those places that this will be very helpful. And then, of course, ongoing, we're going to need to continue to adapt and practice and make this tool something that's meaningful to all of us. I'm going to turn it over to Mackenzie for the final slide, and we want to hear from you.
Yes, so commissioners, this is where we now are looking for some questions, feedback, just kind of from everything that you've heard. And also I'm glad you are able to have the slides in front of you, just kind of what you've been able to review, just kind of thoughts, like, do you feel like we're on the right path forward? Are there things that you felt like we've been missing? Is there anywhere, like, I know that we got some spaces and we've come up on our own kind of where we think we could implement this equity lens, but is there anything or an area that you all think collectively or individually that would work for us to maybe start to implement our equity lens and kind of move forward? And just kind of, yeah, like what your interest is to use the tool, and just to be able to get a letter from the board or county administrator for the toolkit is something we've been working on. I know Kachina, I believe, sent out, we were working on that to have kind of something to go out to kind of present it when we are using the toolkit. And so, yeah, that concludes the slide. So the floor is yours, commissioners. Please let us know.
I don't know if you noticed, but there's a commissioner that's been jumping on to say something. That would be Commissioner Farr.
I'm not certain that I was the first, but I just wanted to express my appreciation for this set of slides, the outline that's been presented. It is just an outline. It really is the foundation of the work that you're doing and the work that you're prescribing that we do, not just today, but in perpetuity. And that is the key, is that we are embracing this in perpetuity. And today is a beginning, or today is a continuation of your work. I wanted to talk about Luke Arnold a little bit. You know, Luke, you did something that is really critical to our work in so many areas, but in particular in this area. You put things in terms that people understand. And in order for people to fundamentally change, two things have to exist. First, you have to want to change. And second, you have to know how to change. And they're pretty separate. They don't necessarily come in the same package. Wanting to change is something that really is driven from the inside. Knowing how to change is learning and observing and collecting information, knowing how to change. You talked about your personal running style, changing your running form, and you described it in detail. And what you described, Luke, was something that I could understand very easily, because more than 50 years ago, my coach was Bernie Widener, who worked closely with Bill Bowerman and Bill Dellinger, and he taught me that exact form. Now, I'm not going to talk about form at all. It's changed a little, stride length, a few things. Equipment, technology has certainly changed. Training methods have changed, but the running style remains the same. Now, for me, I learned that early, so it became a part of the way I run. With equity and with the things that we're talking about today, I did not learn that early. I'm learning it late in life. And many of us are learning late in life. If you catch things when you're young, it becomes a part of the way you operate for your entire life. But as you get more experienced and older, it becomes really important that first off, you know how to change. And second off, we drive the desire for people to want to change. The first is relatively easy. It's an outline and a prescribed process quite often. The second, the desire, is something that isn't easy. It's something that really has to be generated in ways that you, Luke, I think, provided an example of how to do it. Talking in terms people understand, bringing it home to people so that they see it on a very personal level. Otherwise, why would you want to change if you don't see it on a personal level? For me, 4 years ago, a group of young men forced my daughter-in-law and my grandbaby to walk across the street on Fifth Avenue because they were going to throw her back over the wall. Now, whatever had led up to that point, as far as my personal belief in equity and personal belief in the things that you are working on, at that point, all of a sudden, it was my DNA. It became my DNA. And it's really impossible to overlook once it becomes ingrained in that fashion. Mr. Rickoff, you and I started working on the City of Eugene's Human Rights Commission once again in 1995. That was a long, long time ago. That commission and the work has evolved significantly since then, but it remains the same to me as far as I'm concerned, that you have a wonderful outline that we should as a board embrace and do every single thing that we can to move forward and to make and to facilitate your work. But in the meantime, it becomes incumbent upon us to drive the desire to change in people's hearts and people's minds so that they understand that change is necessary, so that they understand that they can change and that there is a real, absolute reason to change. Mr. Chair, I'm going to stop talking at this point in time. I may have further questions, but once again, Mr. Rickoff, Ms. Inman, to the committee or workforce, bravo, work well done. These slides really contain everything, but once again, it's just an outline. It's just the start of work plan. Tactics, strategies are how we go forward from here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there any other commissioner? This is the moment where commissioners kind of see who's going to talk next, you know, and kind of wait. Commissioner Buck.
Well, you have some very specific questions on here, and I want to address those first. I absolutely feel you're on the right path, and very supportive of everything that you're doing. What are we missing? I actually don't know the answer to that question because it seemed extremely thorough, everything that you've already presented. And I'm sure you have all gone into much more depth than what you're presenting just here to us today as policymakers. So I don't necessarily have an answer for that particular question. The next one, are we ready to continue to commit to moving this work forward? I am absolutely committed to helping move this work forward. I have extreme interest in utilizing the tool once you feel it's ready for us, even as just the board, as policymakers to do. So when that is ready for us to implement, I am 100% on board and committed to doing that. I would love to see a letter from the board or the county administrator or however it seems most appropriate as we implement this throughout the county in different departments and different aspects of our services. I am just thrilled to see this work moving along as it is.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, everyone, for this great presentation, but all the work that went into it and is ahead of us, and for your big brains and your open hearts to getting this work done. I'm really so grateful, so excited to be joining the county at this time and in this seat. I echo everything Commissioner Buck just mentioned, and I want to also kind of riff off of Luke's frame that he gave us and mention specifically for us as commissioners. It was a phenomenal, useful analogy, but it was also very much a personal one and about individual behavior and what an individual can do in terms of what they can learn and how they can change. And what I want to add, and what I think is first and foremost our jobs as commissioners, is to consider the context, the conditions, and the environment in which individuals are learning new running styles, or whatever it might be, right? However that analogy plays out. Because really, harking back to the conversation we just had on another agenda item, as Commissioner Bozovich brought up, addressing these root causes is really what's going to bring about the long-term sustained change that we need. And so it's those conditions, that context, the environment in which individuals are operating, that is really going to bring about the paradigm shifting, quite frankly, that needs to happen in this country and in our county as a reflection of what's happening in our country. So I bring that up to just say, you know, I'm so interested in and committed to and understand our role in this work as commissioners is to look at those foundational environmental contextual conditions in which community members are operating, and how important it is to keep that in mind, to take it out of that personal responsibility framework and think about it as an environmental context in which people are operating, and what kind of opportunities do they have and what's available to them. I wanted to appreciate when Nevada asked for us to think of a specific example of work that we might apply the equity lens. And it was so clear to me we had a conversation yesterday at our meeting about beginning our strategic planning process as the current strategic plan expires this year. And this equity lens is quite frankly the perfect container in which to approach that work. So I'm really excited about that. It's not static work. So when you ask, what are we missing? To me, that's what I think we need to ask at the end of every meeting, if not at the end of every agenda item, and ask ourselves every single day, what are we missing? Because we're always missing something, because that's the nature of how dynamic the work is. And as we continue to improve and do better, conditions will change, outcomes will change, people's experiences will be different. And so we'll be missing different things, because that landscape will look different and people's experience will be different. So I could say so much about this work because I just love it and I'm excited for it. But I'll stop there, and just by restating my appreciation to all of you for your commitment to this work and how much time I know you're putting into it, and how much your own personal experiences inform the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So, I say, do you all know? See, we have, yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. I just want to say, I think, it seems like we're heading on the right path. I do want to say, though, that, it's the first time I've heard of the Ottawa tool, and a quick Google search came up with their handbook, and there's 20 some pages behind those 11 bullet points. So I'd kind of like to have a chance to read those 20 some pages.
Good.
Because it wasn't in the agenda memo, and it wasn't referenced prior to today. So this is the first time I'm seeing it. So you're asking me to make a huge commitment to that tool without having knowledge of it is asking me to make a leap a little bit too far at this point. But I will say, just looking at the bullet points, it looks like the typical recommendations for any management consultant to almost any organization of how to become a highly functioning organization, no matter what the issue is. That you want to, engage your community and staff, all those things, and it fits really well with our strategic plan. And exactly some of my concerns yesterday were, how do we reach some of the people we don't hear from normally? I asked that question, how can we do that? Because I know in our public comment sessions, we repetitively get the same people coming to us over and over again. So we're hearing similar, same voices. So how can we get to that broader community and some of those voices we don't hear? And that's sort of what we're asking for. So my commitment to trying to reach those voices, understand their concerns, and include their concerns in our strategic plan matches that equity lens, I think, very well. So I think we're heading in the right direction with this. But I just want to kind of preface that with my background and what I bring to this is my engineer's INTJ personality. I want to read it. And that's my personal thing. It's my running style that I've grown up with and the way my brain works. And it's very difficult for me not to ask to have an opportunity to look something over before I throw my full weight behind it. And so, Luke, as an athlete also, and going from a pedal masher to a spinner on my bicycle and racing over the years, I get it. That things change, and it's not an easy thing to do. And that's something I don't think I've ever quite been able to change about me, is that inherent personality traits that want me to read detail. So that's where I am.
Oh, well, before I say anything, Commissioner Buck.
I forgot one thing that I wanted to add. I had made a note while you were speaking that, a lot of people want to do the right thing. They want to be able to see through an equity lens, but they simply don't know how. And this provides us as a county, as part of our duty to the public, to provide those skills not only to our staff, but also be a leader in it, and as an example to our community in how you do that, because this isn't going to happen overnight, right? This is a work that's been going on for Lord knows how long now, right? And but we're paying attention to it more and more. And I just feel very strongly that as a county, it's our leadership duty to implement this and to do it right. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely. Commissioner Trieger, I cannot tell, are you raising your hand? Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, thank you, Commissioner Buck, for that comment. And I just want to say I agree when you say get it right, but I also just want to caution us that we don't focus too much on whether we're doing it right or not, because right can look a lot of different ways, and focusing on doing it the right way can sometimes, we can get caught up and get defensive, or basically get ego involved when we're worried about whether we're being right, as opposed to whether we're continuing to move forward and whether we're learning. So sometimes getting something wrong is as productive. Sorry, speaking of environments, automatic light switch here. Sometimes getting is destructive, because then we can hear back about what was off the mark, and how did we miss that mark, and how do we need to adapt and adjust. So I just want to offer that as a way to think about the work ahead, as we're working, as I said, on creating these big shifts for, are folks in our community running on bark trails or paved trails? Are they on a hilly environment or a flat surface? Is the wind coming at them from the front, back, or side, right? Those are big things that you can't always get right. And again, it's not static, it's dynamic work. So I just want to give us all some grace to not focus too much and not be hard on ourselves if we don't get it right, because we won't a lot. It's how we handle when we don't get it right that matters. Thank you.
Great point. Great point.
I know I'm going to forget everything I wanted to say, because now I need to call on Commissioner Bozovich.
I'll be very quick. I just want to say that in some of my other reading I'm doing for the PSEC work plan work group on this particular issue, reading on the characteristics of white supremacy, one of the things that they talk about, Commissioner Trieger just touched upon, is perfectionism, and as being a trait, and to avoid that. So it's fascinating that her comments about don't be so concerned about absolutely getting it right fall right into some of what they're suggesting is some of the antidotes to that culture. So it's just interesting to watch her comments match the reading I'm doing as I talk about having to do more reading.
Commissioner Trieger, I want to let you know I've never heard any comment like that from Commissioner Bosevich to date. Commissioner Farr, did you want to weigh in a second round before I say something?
Chair Bernie, I'm anxious to hear what you have to say.
I am too. It's going to be jumbled. First, I want to say if you don't mind my calling you by first names, I hope you don't, for Mackenzie and to Luke and Nevada, Tekla, Kachina, and Greg, thank you so much for what you've brought us. My first comment is it's about freaking time. Let me explain why I say that, because I'm coming from we all come from different places and we all are respectful of that. In the mid-1970s, one of the books that was most seminal in my life was a book written by Huey Newton called Revolutionary Suicide. It was written while he was in prison for organizing then the Black Panthers in East Oakland to police the police because of what they felt was a discrepancy in law enforcement. He came out of prison and ended up at UC Santa Cruz where I was. He was older than I, and he taught a graduate course. He was in a graduate program, and I got to be his TA. And I learned from him, and we developed a relationship. And I can tell you that he would have said that equity means redistributing wealth and power and opportunity and resources so that those most vulnerable and have least have a little more. I've led a life that suggests that action is how we approach this, and that many have preceded us and given their lives or worked all of their lives for this, many of whom have traversed through Lane County, interestingly enough. The oldest of which I introduced to Mo Young, he will be 90 in March. And he, at 12 years old, was brought by African-American, brought by his family from Mississippi to Portland, and lived and grew up in Vanport, and has so many stories and what have you. But, you know, this is not for me to ramble. I would, to the question that was posed to us, think about when an equity lens would be appropriate. Speaking only for myself, my response would be everywhere all the time. Given the example of building a new building, remember when I think Nevada, you said put something in your mind. I hope you're connected. It turns out I think I'm a puppet for your group. We created, I hope you're aware, we created something called a community benefits agreement that is now, the components of which are built into the strategic plan of Lane County. And there are some relevant ones as it related to building new buildings, that when we are looking for the jobs that are being created locally, in there it identifies reaching out to groups that have been historically excluded from full workforce participation, and it names out as the building trades across the United States in their project labor agreements call out for a focus on recruiting minorities, women, and veterans into registered apprenticeship programs. It also calls out for procurement priorities that relate to suppliers and working with women and minority-owned businesses here in Lane County. So I presume you're aware of this, but if you're not, I would suggest just connecting to the multiple other things consistent with the equity lens that I hear you discussing that are in place, because mine is always a bias for action and for results. I would like to share that someone mentioned climate action and just transition, and it was my honor to appoint to the Lane County Climate Advisory Group a woman named Haley K. Scott, who is a Native American from Oregon, a young woman, very strong. She actually is one of 3 people we will be voting on for chair of that organization or that advisory body. And I just think she would be such an advocate and good connector for you to reach deeper and deeper into the community. As with most commissioners, I 1000% appreciate the opportunity to support your work. My input will only be how to make it even more effective and impactful, because much of my life has been working from the sidelines on the things that you're talking about and doing what I could. And this is just an opportunity to do more. So I thank you. In fact, I'm kind of lucky that right now I happen to be the new chair of the board this year. So I hope I get to be one of the signatures on any letter that you need to support your efforts. Are there other comments from commissioners? I saw Greg's hand up. Greg?
Chair Bernie, commissioners, thank you. Thank you very much. We were expecting and hoping for the depth of this conversation. It's truly appreciated the fact that several of you mentioned the strategic plan. I couldn't help but say that yesterday I was in my office jumping up and down saying, oh, the timing's so right to be having this conversation. And the universally shared dissatisfaction with not being inclusive, not engaging, I think really spoke to exactly how we see this tool working. Please note that we're not asking this to be something similar to the health and all policies piece. I think it's a great addition to your board memos, so you understand, what the health implications are for the decisions you're making. But I think we all note that over time that information for you is as good as the specific effort of the individual. So sometimes it's very rich and thoughtful, and other times, the number of times I've reviewed board packets which says there's no health implications for this, and it makes me cringe a little bit, because I can think of several on face value. This needs to be not only a policy vision tool, but it needs to be part of the muscle memory of the organization. It's got to be ingrained in the, down into all the decisions we're making. The Ottawa tool, we will be happy to share with you a much larger packet of information. I would also send you to the Multnomah County background information, which I found was rich and detailed. What we are trying for is a tool that is lean enough to be utilitarian in most every case. And that's why you've had the refinement piece. But for those of you who would like greater exposure to how these different communities have had their tools evolve into what they currently use, we would be very pleased to share that information. Chair Bernie, I was pleased to hear you wanting to sign the letter. I think my thinking is I would like both a letter from the board as well as a letter from the county administrator. I think we need to be a unified front in articulating just how critical this is. I know I have more elements, but I'm going to leave it there due to time.
Are there any other comments either from commissioners or presenters before we adjourn this work session? Well, if I may take the liberty of speaking for all of us, thank you all so much for your work. Okay, we are now moving to item 3, other business. On our agenda, 3A, Order 21-01-13-01. And we have Sheriff Harold and Mr. Dingle here to discuss this with us. And I didn't know if Mr. Mokraheisi wanted to introduce it or not.
No, thank you, Chair. We'll give it right to, I think, to Steve Dingle.
Good morning, Chair Bernie and Board of the Commissioners. The sheriff has a plan for a proposed police service district that he wants to put on the May ballot. The creation of these special districts is very complicated and is a series of interlocking events that have these timelines. And one of those, to get this kicked off at the and to meet that timeline is to have this schedule this meeting, because it has to be published for not less than 30 days and not more than 50 days. So unfortunately, given the down weeks of the board, that lands right in the middle of one of those, the time frame lands in the middle of one of those things. So we're proposing a hearing on this on February 16th at 9 o'clock. And what I would say is that based upon the fact that the sheriff plans on having 2 other additional opportunities for public input, which are not required by the process. So I want to emphasize we're going above and beyond. It's my expectation that that meeting on the 16th at 9 o'clock will be extremely brief, and the materials will be prepared for the board. That will basically be a resolution, if the board decides to do that, referring it to the ballot, which we've already actually prepared, the language and that sort of thing. So this is really just a ministerial thing to start the clock ticking and to start the process. The sheriff, I understand, is prepared to make a much more detailed presentation to you on the 26th about this proposal. That's not what this is about today. This is really just to, again, start that process. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And Sheriff, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
Only that I apologize that the way the timeline has worked out, we had this intention and do have this intention to do the presentation to the board on the 26th of this month, and came to realize that we needed this 30-day window. So bringing this, again, as Mr. Dingle said, to you today for the ministerial task, but looking forward to getting to talk with you more about this on the 26th.
Thank you, Sheriff. Commissioner Buck.
As this particular item lies within my particular district, it'd be my honor to move Order 21-01-13-01 as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I have something.
Chair Bobby?
Yeah, go ahead, Diane. I was going to mention it.
Thank you. Please do so. Thank you.
We know who really runs this place, right? Anyway, Ms. Jones has let Mr. Mokrahysky and I know that she would like to add Chair Buck, I'm sorry. She would like to add, Commissioner Buck, if you are accepting of it, the words, the public hearing to be February 16th, 9 a.m. time certain to your motion.
Yes, please.
Okay, that's what I was just going to do.
Does that meet with the approval of the second, Commissioner Farr?
Yes, thank you.
It's been moved by Commissioner Buck, chaired by Commissioner Farr. I'm not going to read.
Chair, I think Commissioner Farr seconded it.
We're still chairing it, though.
I'm sorry. It's been moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Farr. This motion, I'm not going to repeat it now. Is there discussion to the motion? Commissioner Buck.
I just want to give a great deal of appreciation to Sheriff Harold for going through all the community discussions, making so many individual calls to folks in that district, and putting a lot of effort into this. I hope it's successful. Thank you.
Is there additional discussion? I just want to thank Sheriff Harold for taking up our morning on the 16th of February. If there is no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say.
I'm sorry, I get my audible aye. I was muted. Thank you.
I know Commissioner Farr is having the same issue. All opposed, same sign. The motion made by Commissioner Buck and seconded by Commissioner Farr, setting the public hearing for the Mohawk Valley Law Enforcement District formation with a permanent tax set for Tuesday, February 16th, 9 a.m. time certain, is unanimously approved.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mokrahysky, other members of the board, is there any other business before we adjourn?
No.
Then without gavel, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.